speakers, and we will forward them on to you. So I'd like to start by introducing myself. My name is Angela Watt. I'm a patient trustee at the charity Kidney Research UK, and I see a few familiar faces and names there. Good to see you all. I'm also a recently retired renal nurse. I was a renal nurse for more than 20 years here in the UK, and I retired last year because I have stage 4 chronic kidney disease. Chronic kidney disease has affected 5 members of my family, including myself and my youngest son, who is 16 and approaching transplant at the moment. So we really understand the importance of research and funding research into kidney disease to make a difference to lives. We have 2 inspirational speakers for you all today. Unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you look at it, we have had a slight last-minute change to the lineup. Kuts Monongi, who was meant to speak to us today, is unfortunately unable to, but that's because he's been given the go-ahead to go back on the transplant list and he has to have some medical interventions done today. So obviously that took priority. But instead we have Kathryn Croker, who is another kidney patient who's agreed to speak alongside Dr. Farah Latif. First of all, I'd like to begin by introducing Sandra Curry. Sandra, as most of you will know, is the Chief Executive of the charity Kidney Research UK. And Sandra is going to begin by sharing our vision of the future at the charity and how we're leading a transformation of kidney health in the UK. Thank you, Sandra.
Thanks, Angela, and good morning, everybody. I'm really delighted that so many of you have been able to join us today. And really looking forward to hearing Kathryn's story and to hear from Dr. Farah Latif, as Angela's just described. I'm just going to set the scene a wee bit about where the organisation is at the moment. As you probably all know, the pandemic had a really significant impact on our work last year. And our income dropped by around 50%. We kind of knew that was coming and tried to make changes and adjustments to get as much income in as we could in the year, but it did work out that what we anticipated was a drop of about half of our income. And that meant we had to make some really tough decisions at the very beginning of the year. So in March last year and April, we paused all new research grants entirely. That was really hard, because we know that as we build in new bits of research every year, that's what the organisation is about. That as patients and clinicians and researchers, you can see us embarking on new journeys of exploration and finding new discoveries. And to put a complete halt to any new activity felt really harsh, but it was a really important thing to do to make sure we were stable, to make sure we could fund all the current work that was ongoing. But we couldn't do anything new. I'm really pleased to say that by the end of the year, we were able to revisit that position. And in fact, we made some new awards in March and in April, in fact, of this year. And that felt really good. We were enormously relieved that we'd been able to stabilise and build sufficient funds to make those new awards and begin to see some of that hope and prospect of new findings emerging. But we were only able to spend in that latter part 2.2 million on research in the year, and we normally would have spent more than 5 in that period. So it was definitely much less than we'd expected, but at least we were underway and getting back on track again. And it's really great today to see that Dr. Latif is joining us, because she, in fact, was one of those people who was halted in her tracks in March 2020 when she'd applied to us for funds. And it took us a whole year to get back to be able to say, tell us what you want to do. And yes, we will fund you. And you're going to hear a bit about that today. So for me, it's a real pleasure that it's Farah that's joining us this morning as an indication of how we are getting back on track. During the year, despite all of that adverse impact of the pandemic, we were able to launch our Transforming Treatments campaign. And we've pledged, and some of you hopefully will have seen and heard some of the things we're saying about that. We're pledging to transform kidney health over the next 10 years. Many of you know how difficult kidney disease treatments are. They're really tough at times, and in the last year that we've had, for many of you, it will have been even tougher. Dialysis, we know, is not a kind treatment, and it brings with it quite a lot of burden. And transplants are not always the answer. They're not a lifetime answer, and they themselves bring additional risks often to people too. So we're pledging in the charity that with your support, we will work really hard to generate new income that will be focused towards research that helps us transform treatments and really accelerates improvements into fantastic treatments for patients, but ones that we know can be better. And we're determined to make a difference to them over the next few years. So our campaign is trying to raise £3 million, and that will focus on research, particularly around diagnosis, dialysis and transplantation. And there are so many patients I could describe why I know that matters. But one perhaps over the last year who I've been in touch with and been able to watch how much the pandemic has had an impact on him and why transforming treatments is so important. And many of you will have read and seen wee Daniel, a little boy who lives up in Dunfermline in Scotland, and he features on many of our current campaigns, and he's on our Update magazine and things in the past. So you'll have seen and heard his story. So he from birth had kidney concerns. He was on dialysis as a little toddler. He was then successfully transplanted with a donation from his auntie, and all was looking well. Dialysis for him was quite difficult and involved numerous operations and hospital trips and hospital stays. But the transplant is struggling this year, and his family are worrying about whether that means he's rejecting, his kidney function's deteriorating. He's again now had hospital visits during COVID when actually no one wants to be near any of the big hospitals, and that's what he's having to do. So it's people like Daniel and people like all of you, anyone of any age. All of your stories matter, and that's why we need to really get on and do something different and really accelerate our work, in particular around transforming treatments. The organisation is about research, of course, understanding, improving what we know, increasing our understanding so that we can make change and make things happen. And as you all know, kidney disease affects a lot of people. Across the world, it's 1 in 9 people have kidney disease, and yet it is significantly underfunded, not just here in the UK, but worldwide. And we want to try and change that. So we want to try and influence the investment that happens, not just through us, but across the world, to make sure we can ensure the future is better than some of the past has been. So as the largest kidney charity in the UK, we really are determined not to be stopped in that mission and to achieve the ambitions that the new strategy you'll hear us talk about, and we'll be sending you information in various magazines, whatever communication you get from us. We're really determined, despite the difficult year we've had, despite the kind of pause button that I described earlier that happened last year. We're ready to start now in 2021, our 60th anniversary year, to really ramp things up and make a difference. So I'm really pleased to be with you today, really looking forward to hearing Kathryn and Farah speak, and I'll join you back later too, I think, to say a few.
Thank you very much, Sandra. I'll just reiterate, it was a real highlight to be able to end the year at the charity actually funding some research after what has been an extremely difficult year for us. And I really like the idea of the transforming treatments. You know, as somebody who's going to need dialysis pretty soon, and as I've said myself, my son will both need a transplant in the future. I want to make sure that transplants will last people for life, but also that the side effects of the treatments aren't worse than the kidney disease that people have to suffer in the first place. And it's great to see so much research being funded again around that. So I'd now like to begin introducing our guest speakers today. Kathryn Croker is a kidney patient who was diagnosed at the age of 13 with a condition called hemlock shine purpura. I think I might have pronounced that right, also known as IgA vasculitis HSP. Following on from that, Kathryn suffered what can only be described as a roller coaster of ill health before finally in 2013 receiving a transplant from her father. And they've just celebrated their 8-year kidneyversary, which, as all kidney patients will know, is the anniversary of their kidney transplant. And then joining us as well is Dr. Farah Latif. Farah is a researcher at Cardiff University, and she's been funded by Kidney Research UK to look at how a common viral infection known as HCMV interacts with the immune system in transplant patients and how the immune system then seeks to fight that infection. And this is the first step towards new antiviral drugs that can hopefully protect kidney patients from this virus. So thank you very much, both of you, for joining us today. Kathryn, I'd like to start with you, if I may. You were diagnosed with kidney disease at the age of 13, which to so many of us will seem an impossibly young age to go through that, but sadly to many will also not seem very young. Can you tell us what that was like for you and what you can remember from that time?
Yeah, so I was initially diagnosed with the HSP, known more widely now as IgA vasculitis, when I was 12. And yeah, to start off with, I had this rash on my legs, but aside from that, I felt completely fine. We were told by doctors, you know, should be better in about 6 weeks' time. But when you're 12, 6 weeks seems, you know, just even the 6 week summer holidays just, you know, seems like an eternity, doesn't it? So I thought, oh my gosh, 6 weeks is such a long time. But as the days and the weeks progressed, I kind of got a lot worse. The HSP just affected my whole body to the point where I couldn't walk. My legs and my ankles were really swollen. My joints were so painful. I was being sick and I had horrendous stomach pains. And yeah, it really wasn't pleasant at all. And it was funny actually, because I was actually starting to feel a bit better when I was diagnosed, when I was rushed into hospital because my kidneys had failed. So I was starting to get out a little bit more. I was able to walk, still a little bit painful, but you know, able to walk. So I remember when my mum got the call to say I needed to get to a renal unit that night. This was one afternoon in January, and that was obviously really scary because obviously we thought that I was getting better. So then I was rushed to Great Ormond Street, and just, you know, I had dialysis, 10 lots of plasma exchange, so many medications, toxic medications, such a high dose of steroids, just to kind of, they just basically kind of threw everything at me to try and help me. And actually I was very, very fortunate to leave hospital with around 40% kidney function, which is something they didn't think would happen. They thought, you know, I was booked in to have a more permanent access for dialysis, to have that 3 times a week. So in that respect, I was very fortunate. But it was tough. I think looking back now, it's only as I've got older that I really realised the true impact it had on me as a child. Whereas when I was younger, I just kind of got on with it. I just kind of accepted it and just kind of took it for what it was, really. But looking back, it was tough because I missed the whole of year 8 from school, and obviously back then, this was over 20 years ago, we didn't have mobile phones, we didn't have any social media, so it was really tough to keep in contact with people. And the kidney disease, it really affected my self-confidence, my self-image. It really did have a big impact on me. At the time, I didn't think it did, but as I said, looking back now, I think it really did, and it did change who I was a lot. It really affected my self-confidence, and I think I became quite anxious. And obviously with the high dose of steroids, I looked different as well because I'd lost so much weight prior to going into hospital. Then I put loads of weight on, and it was hard when you're a teenager. It's hard anyway, isn't it? But Yeah, it was definitely a big thing. But I think when I was younger, I did just get on with it, and I always try and remain quite positive.
That's good. That's good to hear. I think kidney disease is never easy, but as a teenager, it is particularly hard to come to terms with, as you say, the side effects of the meds and things like that. Yeah. Farah, if I can ask you, I was reminded to what Kathryn said there about, 6 weeks and 6 weeks seems a long time. And that reminded me of March last year when we were all told, lockdown was going to be 12 weeks. And you think that's going to be a long time. And here we are 15 months later. All our lives have been limited due to COVID-19. Could you explain to us, Farah, a little bit about why kidney transplant patients are more vulnerable to infection than others in the general population, and why HCMV in particular is a threat to transplant patients?
Thanks, Angela. As you said, the last 18 months, nearly now, 15 months, has been very, very tough. Tough on our patients, tough on the clinicians, and trying to keep our patients as healthy as possible. To be able to fight infections like COVID-19 and indeed CMV, we do need a very healthy immune system. Now, kidney transplant is a particular important case because to achieve a healthy kidney after transplantation, we have to suppress the immune system and weaken it medically to keep the kidney as healthy as possible. Unfortunately, that's not a selective process, which means that we are unable to, sorry, I'm getting a bit of a technical issue. Can you see me okay?
Yeah, we can see and hear you. Yes, fine.
So to be able to keep the kidney healthy, as I said, we need to give immunosuppression lifelong, and this is not a selective process, which means that we are inadvertently weakening the immune system against fighting infections, and that is why it's very, very difficult to keep our patients healthy during a pandemic. This is why we had to get our patients to shield by and large. Now, with CMV, it's particularly interesting because CMV has been in the human population for thousands of years. So in a immune-competent patient, it doesn't cause any problems. It remains chronic and dormant. And the problem with it is our immune system can't actually clear it anymore because it has been in the community for so long. Now, what that means, it's the likelihood of getting a kidney transplant with CMV in it is actually very, very high. And despite giving preventative treatment in the form of antiviral medication to our patients, those who haven't had a CMV infection in the past but receive a kidney with CMV infection, or from a patient who had CMV, can have very difficult course after transplantation. In fact, 1 in 2 of our patients suffer infection in their bloodstream. And at the moment, the antivirals are limited. They can be very toxic, and we're seeing more resistance. And also, because CMV has been in the community for so long and has evolved with our immune system, it's a lot harder to create a vaccine for it, despite all the research. So it's extremely important that we do carry out research in viruses, obviously like COVID, but also like CMV, whereby they are in the community a lot more prevalent, and we are unable to clear them and unable to make a vaccine yet for them.
It's amazing, isn't it? Because I think until I started working in renal, I'd never heard of CMV. But as you say, it is so common and it's such a huge issue for kidney transplant patients as well. Kathryn, on a more positive note, you had a kidney transplant from your dad in 2013. Can you tell us how this changed your life? But also, are there any restrictions still placed on you following the transplant? And also what you knew about or have heard about CMV post-transplant?
Yeah, so obviously I was very lucky to receive my dad's kidney 8 years ago, and I think before I had it, I didn't actually realise how poorly I was. I think a lot of the time when you live with a chronic illness, especially when it's, I'd been living with it since the age of 13, you kind of get used to the symptoms that you're getting, and you kind of adapt. So I didn't actually realise how poorly I was, despite my kidney function being 4%. So when I received the kidney, it was just amazing that obviously, when I've recovered and it was things like I wouldn't get out of breath walking up the stairs, or going for a walk, or one of the things that sticks in my mind is, which like I say, I adapted to, and I remember when I told my mum this, she was a bit horrified, but it was, I would sit down to dry my hair and I'd have to keep putting my hair down because it was making me out of breath. And thinking about that now, I think, oh my gosh, that's crazy. But I did just get used to it. Obviously, I wasn't on a fluid restriction anymore, so that was really good as well. Prior to transplant, I was really restricted, with my diet. So I had to follow a low potassium diet, which at times it could be really tricky. But you know, I tried to do that as best as I could. Things like the tiredness as well. The tiredness, I think it is something that you do get used to, but it's a completely different type of tiredness to what I get now. So I'd wake up in the morning and I would be tired, and I could sleep for 14 hours and still be tired. Whereas now, you know, I can get a good night's sleep and I wake up the next day and I'm okay. So just everything like that was just, you know, it has just, you know, really been such a blessing and has transformed my life, and I was able to return to work. You know, everything like that, it was just amazing. In terms of the CMV, I don't really think it was something that I was that aware of prior to my transplant. I don't know if that's possibly because my dad donated to me, and I don't know if kind of tests were done prior to that. It's only really been since my transplant, and I've become friends and known a lot of people who have had transplants and who have experienced CMV and been through treatment, that I've really begun to understand what it is. And luckily for me, I feel really lucky that I haven't suffered with it, but I know how hard it can be for people who do.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Again, it's something that you don't know about unless you're a kidney patient, you hear about it. But also, I really enjoyed hearing what you said there. I said before, on a personal note, I've got a 16-year-old son who's heading to transplant, and he's very nervous about it. And we've tried explaining to him that what you've just expressed, how actually you don't know how much better you're going to feel until you go through that. So I'm going to show him what you said now. Farah, can I ask you about your research? What is it that you hope to achieve from your research, and what difference could that make to kidney patients?
So my research is currently focused on human cytomegalovirus, as I said. So I'll be looking at how the virus interacts with our immune system in the transplant patients that we have consented into our study. Essentially that interaction, vital interaction, is going to be important to learn more about the immune system in general and how it interacts with viruses in a transplant patient. So not only would it help with CMV, prevention is the aim, we also hope to prevent other viruses in the transplant cohort. Indeed, I found two markers already. So one that can tell us whether you're likely to get CMV about a month earlier than being able to pick it up in clinic, which is an extremely vital tool that we've discovered and we're trying to do further studies on. What that will help us is give targeted therapies, so targeted prophylaxis to patients rather than one treatment fits all. We'll be able to give more personal therapy to patients so that we can really target infection at its root cause. Another marker which has come out of the research is one of those who do develop the infection, whether they go on to develop some kidney damage with the infection. And again, that's extremely important because we can plan better, we can treat better, and we can prevent it. And we hope that some of the lessons we've learned from this research will be translated to things like COVID and other emerging viruses, and really build our understanding of how the immune system in a kidney transplant patient can fight infection in general.
That sounds really exciting. And I mean, even being able to pick it up that month earlier could make such a difference. Even that small step will make such a difference to kidney patients, I think. Kathryn, I wonder if I could ask you about being on dialysis before you had your kidney transplant, and what that was like. There'll be a lot of people here who've undergone dialysis. How was that for you? What strategies did you use to cope with it at the time?
Yeah, so I think when I went on to dialysis, it was a bit of a shock, because obviously the hospital were hoping to do a preemptive transplant. So I had my transplant before needing dialysis. But unfortunately that didn't happen. My dad was still having testing, and my results, even though I thought I was fine, even though I wasn't fine, my results just got so bad that in the end my consultant rang and said, you know, you need to come in the next day. So because of that, I didn't really have a lot of time to process it or think about it, because it was literally less than 24 hours. So then I went into hospital, had a line put in, went on to dialysis that afternoon. So it was a little bit overwhelming when I started it. I think it's a real tough one, because everyone's experiences on dialysis are so different. For me, although the dialysis, it did make me feel better, not after a dialysis session. After a session, I used to feel really washed out, really tired. But in terms of things like, I suffered a lot with swelling, so swelling in my legs and my feet, all of that, in my face, all of that went, which was really good. And I didn't feel too bad. I did really suffer with high blood pressure though, which was obviously a massive worry. So even after dialysis, my blood pressure was so high. Like, it was, at one point it was in the 200s, and it was a really scary time, and a bit of a vicious circle, because obviously you want to try and remain calm to help your blood pressure a little bit, but when it's that high, you can't help but worry about it and worry about what the consequences of that might be. So in terms of that was really tough. I was also quite worried about, obviously I had the line in, and I did everything I could to make sure I kept it clean and didn't get any infections, and luckily I didn't. I was very careful about that, but to be honest, I'm not really sure if I was that equipped, like mentally, to deal with it. I think, as I said, even going back to when I was a child, I think I'd just kind of get on with things and just kind of take it for what it is. So yeah, I mean, the staff were amazing at the unit that I was at, and that really helped. They were just wonderful. So that definitely helped. But I did really struggle on dialysis. I couldn't do 4 hours. Most people do 4 hours 3 times a week. I couldn't do that. I had to do 3.5, because if I did any more, it made me quite poorly. So it was a worry for me about if I'd have stayed on it, what would have happened. That was kind of a big worry, definitely.
I think it is something that outside the kidney community people know nothing about. I did 16 years as a nurse on a dialysis unit, so I've seen all the effects of dialysis on patients, but I don't think the general population, unless they've been through it or family member, realises actually how much impact it has on your life, the things you miss out on, how much time it takes up in your life and things like that. So it's really important, I think, that we look to try and make dialysis better for patients. Farah, if I can ask you, we've got a number of patients, I'm sure, on the call here today. How have you engaged patients in your research, and why is it important in these days that research is patient focused? So
patients have always been the centre really of my research aims. When I became a registrar in nephrology, I did a transplant placement in Cardiff, and it was very clear that CMV had a big impact, and I knew that I wanted to focus on this area of research in particular. Now, with CMV, I noticed that a lot of patients were having more hospital admissions, much more trouble with it, and I knew that I needed to dedicate some time outside my normal clinical training to study CMV a little bit more. I applied for a small grant, which was for 6 months, discussed things with my mentor, and then I presented that grant idea to a group of patients within the Wales Kidney Research Unit, just to see what they thought about CMV, how much impact it had on their lives, and what they thought would be the most important questions to answer in this area. And one thing I always remember is one of the patients said, I hate the chance nature of it. not being able to know who will get the infection, how we can prevent it, not being able to know which patients the infection will affect the most in terms of kidney damage, and the treatment that we have are also toxic to the patient. Can we not target the virus itself? So when I put my fellowship together to Kidney Research UK, it was all centered around that. So the first aim was to try and get better prevention and to try and find markers for that. The second aim was to try and harness the immune system, so to improve our immunity against it and to try and make sure that patients don't suffer with the infection once they get it. And the third aim is trying to find faults in the genes of the infection of the virus itself to try and target for therapies. And the patients have been extremely important part of my project. Now, why I think research and patients go hand in hand, I also do a lot of clinical trials in nephrology, and I really see the impact patient studies have on bettering patients' health. And also, I can say firsthand that the studies where we engage our patients the most are the most fruitful. So we see the most impact from them, and we see the most engagement in them, and indeed we find the better treatments.
I think it's a win-win situation. The research gets the benefit of the patient knowledge, but from my, patients want to get involved in research. Patients want to help. They want to be part of finding the answers for things. So yeah, it works both ways. Kathryn, if I could ask you, we cannot really talk about anything these days without talking about the pandemic and what's happened over the last year. Can you tell us in particular how that has affected you as a kidney transplant patient?
Yeah, so it has been really tough. I think prior to the pandemic, I very much tried to live my life as normally as possible. Obviously, I'd be very careful not to be around people who were poorly. For example, if I was supposed to be meeting with a friend and they messaged me to say, oh, I've woken up, I'm not feeling great, I've got a cold, then we'd just rearrange. So I'd always be very careful, but I would, I very much lived my life. I'd go to work, which was with the public. I loved being around people. I'd always be here, there and everywhere doing things. And to suddenly overnight go from that to, being told, you have to stay at home, you can't leave your house. Obviously that was the safest thing for us. And to be honest, I got to the point where I actually ended up leaving work early because I was really worried about everything that I was seeing and reading. So I decided to stay at home before we got told to shield. But it is very tough because it kind of makes you feel really vulnerable. And I've got a lot of friends who are in the same situation, and we've all said it kind of takes you back to that place. For the first few months after transplant, where you do have to be very careful, you're on a high dose of immunosuppressants, and you can't be around crowds, and you do have to be really careful. And yeah, it's when you're feeling well in yourself, but you can't do anything and you can't leave the house because it's too dangerous, you feel very, very vulnerable. And for me personally, I literally didn't go out of my front gate for 5 months. I didn't do anything for 5 months. I didn't go for a walk. It sounds crazy now, but I didn't go in the garden for 10 weeks because I was so worried about just being out there and if other people were in their gardens. It really, really, really scared me. And to be honest, even now, obviously 15 months later, I'm still not back at work. I work in retail. I'm still not back at work. I'm very anxious about that. I love going for walks. We'll have a couple of friends over in the garden, and I feel okay about doing that now. But as I said, I used to love being around people, love doing things, love going to places, and it's very tough when you try to live your life. And I've been very fortunate that my transplant has worked, and I've not had a lot of hospital admissions. I know I'm very fortunate with that, so I have it has enabled me to live my life and to do things, which is amazing. But it's just kind of a complete roller coaster of emotions, and it makes you feel a bit sad really when you've been able to to make the most of the transplant, you know, and the gift of life that you've been given, to then kind of be so anxious about doing things. And I think now especially it's hard because people are starting to do more, and you're in a place where you feel like, oh, you do really, you know, I do really want to do stuff, but at the same time I'm still very anxious about doing things, and you kind of have to do things at your own pace when you feel comfortable. So it's, I think you feel vulnerable is the, you know, the main thing that this pandemic has brought upon us.
I think that will resonate with a lot of people here today, and I think you're right. You know, for all, you know, restrictions seem to be easing at the minute. I think, if anything, it's making it worse for people now deciding what to do, and that's something we're going to have to get used to for a long while. I think it's going to take kidney patients a long time to get over this and get back to normal. Farah, if I can ask you, you've been awarded a research training fellowship by Kidney Research UK. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is and how it supports clinicians to engage in research?
So thank you for Kidney Research UK for funding my research. Without it, I wouldn't be here. And doing the research I feel very, very passionate about. Essentially, the research fellowship will allow me to take dedicated time out of my clinical training to be able to take some of the stuff and the aims that I developed within the 6 months small grant funding that I had previously, and the study that we've established here in Cardiff, to be able to take it into a bigger study so that I complete a PhD looking at this area of research, and to try and understand this virus and how it interacts with the immune system a little bit better, and to be able to essentially develop some of my findings from that smaller cohort of 30 patients into the wider cohort now that we have of nearly 150 patients that we've recruited here. So the fellowship is going to be instrumental to my project. There's other projects happening in Cardiff around CMV, which are awaiting clinicians and researchers in terms of having dedicated time and funding for them. But at least my project will be the first step to understand this better. And I couldn't really overemphasize the importance of fellowships like this for clinicians to be able to build capacity, to be able to have the sort of research leaders in the future in this area.
It is, it's great. Again, with my trustee hat on, it's just after the traumas and the hard times of the past year, to be able to talk about research that we've funded recently is absolutely amazing. It really is. Thank you. Kathryn, what do you think the kidney community could do to raise more awareness about kidney disease and to get more kidney donations, I suppose, so more people can get a transplant?
Yeah, so I think obviously awareness is key, and I think it's just kind of getting into the heart of communities and just trying to spread the word about kidney disease. So I'm a community ambassador for Kidney Research UK, and I've volunteered with the charity for around 7 years now, and that's been one of the things that I've always tried to do, try to get into my local community, you know, do talks in the community, do kind of fundraising events, and whilst fundraising, you know, talking to people about kidney disease. One of the things I've always found when I do these kind of awareness stalls and fundraising stalls, obviously not. It's a bit, sorry, I've got a fly. Sorry. Obviously, during COVID, we've not been able to do that, which has been really, you know, it's been frustrating not to be able to do that. But I always find that when I do these things, you always get people who you end up talking to who, you know, there's someone in their family who has kidney disease, or a friend who's on dialysis. And I just find it amazing. You speak to all these people, you know, who then you hope will then go on to speak to other people about it, and obviously raise awareness of the charity and, you know, the work that they do. And I just think in terms of donation as well, I think it's really important if people feel comfortable to share their stories, to share their personal stories. So if they've received a transplant, you know, if they've received a transplant from a living donor, and you know, the living donors to tell their stories. I think that does so much to raise awareness, because it's just so personal, isn't it? And I think that really resonates with people. And especially, I think sometimes it's a bit of a problem with people. And I can't, you know, obviously I don't know, if I wasn't in the situation I'm in, I might think this as well, but I think it's a common misconception that sometimes it's, you know, kind of a kidney disease is something that only older people suffer with. So I think if you can have a range of ages of people telling their stories, getting out there into their communities, which is what all the community ambassadors can do, and hopefully we can soon, at least hopefully next year, really get back out into our communities to raise awareness, then I think that does the world of good. You know, just being that face of, because I think a lot of the time, you know, especially for me, if I tell someone, you know, oh, I've got kidney disease, I've had a transplant, they're like, wow, you know, they can't really believe it, because I don't really think I look like, you know, not that there is kind of a way you should look, but it's just that perception, isn't it? So yeah, so really just getting out into the heart of community to raise awareness.
Yeah, and I mean, we are thankful to all our ambassadors and volunteers. You know, the charity wouldn't be able to do half the work we can do without them getting there and giving their time, you know, sometimes for that. So thank you very much. Farah, I probably should have asked this earlier, but what was it that got you interested in renal medicine and renal research in particular, and how do you see your career progressing in the future?
So my first nephrology job was in Cardiff at foundation level, so F2, and I absolutely fell in love with it. I knew straight away that I'm going to be a kidney person, and I was very lucky to have mentors that were absolutely awesome and who were very research active. So I was able to see really the impact research had on my kidney patients very, very early on, and I knew very quickly that I definitely wanted to do nephrology. I absolutely loved seeing the journey that the kidney transplant patients go through, in terms of the sort of what Kathryn touched on, the normalization that you feel after a horrendous journey with dialysis. And I knew I wanted to be part of that. I wanted to keep patients as healthy as possible during their transplant, and to keep them at that happy stage of their kidney journey. And I very quickly also saw CMV had an impact. So talking to one of my mentors, one of my nephrology mentors in Cardiff, she had contacts with the CMV group based in Cardiff, which is actually internationally renowned for this area of research, and previously hadn't done any patient-focused studies. So that sort of early stages, we were starting to discuss, well, we know CMV is important in our patients. Why don't we set up a research study here in Cardiff? So very early on, I started pursuing the ethics and the logistics of setting up the study and to try and get this research off the ground. And what I hope really after my fellowship with Kidney Research UK and completing my PhD is to take some of the learning and the training that I will receive to be able to go on to an intermediate fellowship and to translate some of the research findings into patient care, to be able to really establish a laboratory looking at not just CMV, but other viruses that affect transplant patients, and take the experience that I've had with CMV and sort of address the emerging viruses that we are seeing, like COVID, like other viruses that patients are at danger from. And to really be able to become a clinician scientist, so that I look after my patients clinically in the transplant setting, but also to be able to innovate and find new treatments for them in the laboratory by supporting further students.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I was drawn to renal because of my family history, but you see people who just, it gets you. You want to stay there. And then on behalf of kidney patients, thank you to all the researchers like you who do that as well. Yeah, and do the research and get involved in it for us. Thank you. Kathryn, if I can just finally ask you, what would you think is the single most important thing research-wise that we should be focusing on over the next few years?
So I find this really tricky to like single it down to one, because there's so many different things. Like I was like, oh my gosh, this is so hard to answer. And I think in a way, I think probably every kidney patient would probably possibly say something different depending on where they are within their kidney journey. So obviously for me, having my transplant, you know, it is a treatment, it's not a cure. And you know that there's an average for how long they last, but realistically, you know, we don't really know how long they last. So I think, you know, and I know the charity is you know, doing this anyway, but just looking into you know, making transplants last for a very, you know, long time, and also making more kidneys viable for transplant. And then obviously in a roundabout way, that's also going to impact upon people who are waiting for a transplant, you know, and people who aren't at that point yet but may need one in the future. Because if it can be that we have one kidney and, you know, it lasts a lifetime, that would be amazing, and there's going to be more, you know, kind of kidneys available to other people who need them for the first time. So I think that's definitely an important thing, especially because, you know, kidneys are the most in demand organ, you know, by thousands, aren't they, you know, on the waiting list. But also I think as well, like Sandra touched on as well, just you know, making treatments kinder, because, you know, obviously I've just talked about transplant, but not everyone can receive a transplant. So it's, you know, it's so important to look at the treatments, you know, dialysis, and just making those a little bit kinder, because you know, some people do really well on dialysis. You know, it's not bad for everyone. Everyone's got such a different experience. But yeah, just, you know, just looking into that and just trying to possibly slow the progression of kidney disease to make sure that people don't end up needing transplants. You know, so I think that's a big thing as well. And then obviously the mental health side of things, because that's something I'm so passionate about, and I think it's something that's only really you know, been looked at the last maybe, you know, few years, because although it's something physical that happens to your body, having a transplant and all the meds you take, it really is, you know, it really does impact upon your mental health when you live with kidney disease and when you have a transplant. So obviously the Andy Cole Fund is, you know, that's been set up is amazing, because that's, you know, obviously you know, getting funds for that. So yeah, I think I might have said about 4 different things there. I apologise, but it was going on. Yeah, it was. I was just thinking, oh my gosh, it's so hard to just.
It is
to choose one.
So much work to do, but
yeah,
we're going to do it. So thank you very much to both of you for sharing your stories with us, and thank you for being part of Team Kidney here at Kidney Research UK. I'm now going to hand back to Sandra, who is going to share her reflections with us on what she's heard this morning. Thank you, Sandra.
Thanks, Angela. Brilliant hosting and fantastic questions. I think you did an excellent job. They'll be after you at the BBC, or and there are other stations, of course, as well. I think one of the things you said at the beginning, Angela, you described it as a roller coaster journey, I think, in response to Kathryn. And we've heard a bit of that both from Farah and Kathryn. I think the thing, of course, that's always in my mind, it's a roller coaster that nobody's bought a ticket for and nobody chooses to go on it. And that's something that is always in our mind as we head into looking at how do we prioritise research. This is a journey that people are dragged into and find it very hard to get off. And we want to do everything to ease that, the burden of that. I loved Kathryn's answer on what's the one thing. We have those kind of conversations all the time, and we raise all of those topics you said, and how do you choose? And the fact is we can't choose one thing over another, because that's leaving something unattended to that we need to be focusing on as an organisation. So what we need to do is raise the priorities at this point in time that we can do something about, and that we can invest in, and we can get support for, and that's poised, ready to make a difference. And I think the impact on the psychological and physical health is such a key point that you raised just at the end there too. And we're doing what we can to try to address that. Our ultimate aim in our strategy is to prevent kidney disease happening from the outset, so that we don't have all of these issues to address. But clearly that's a long way off. So in the meantime, and we've heard both Farah and Kathryn talk about ways that we are able to protect people from the decline in kidney function, protect them from the symptoms and also from some of the treatments. So we need to, while we're doing that prevention work, really focus on how do we protect patients and keep them as healthy as possible for as long as possible. And then we need to transform the treatments, because we know in the meantime these other things are going to take longer. There's some big things we can do to reduce the additional risks that the treatment themselves bring to patients, and that's all what Farah's work is about. And some of the current treatments we know can be better, and we need to really focus on trying to address that. Farah's work is just the kind of work we need to accelerate, and I was listening to her and thinking, thank goodness we were able to come back a year later than when you first thought you were coming for an interview, and interview you at the end of March this year and award you the job, award you the grant to enable you to get on with the job of doing your fantastic research. I think it's inspiring to hear you. And I think I was also really interested in your comment about mentors, because one of the other things the charity is concerned about, which is kind of behind the scenes away from our direct research and our direct project grants, is that key people in the renal community, these eminent doctors and clinicians and pharmacists and people who've got the expertise and have reached a level of seniority, they inspire people like you, Farah, to come in and stay. And who are those people of the future? You know, we don't want an interruption to that flow of people like you coming in, going through the system and becoming one of those senior clinician scientists. We don't want a gap in that progression. And the pandemic threatened that a bit. You know, we didn't want to see people leaving the profession and not being there to draw in those that are just joining the community and just beginning to look at research, because you need that inspiration for you to take your research forward, and then you can inspire us with the work you're doing, which you've just described so brilliantly today. I think we heard a really compelling personal story from Kathryn and a really impressive personal research approach from Farah. And I love the comment I think Farah made. I'm trying to think, who did I hear say it? I think it was Farah. Research and patients go hand in hand. And I think the charity's in the midst of that, and we want to be holding hands too, because I think we can introduce some of those hands to come together. Obviously not now in the current climate in reality, but we need to be able to be bringing people together, because our shared ambition will only be achieved if we all contribute what we can. And that will be, for some people, about funding, for some people about expertise and intellect, those that do the research. For some it will be about spreading the word. And we've just heard Kathryn talk about how she used to do things. And in fact, she's doing it differently now. We're here today on a screen. Kathryn and I were on a radio interview during lockdown talking about, it might have been in transplant week, was it, I think, or in response to the changes in the law. So there are ways we can still be heard and still be seen and still be making a noise about kidney disease, even although it's not our normal way. And there might be some things about how we've learned to do it differently that are beneficial to us. You know, we might continue to do that. We can reach more people online. Events like this, you know, none of us have had to travel. We've given up this piece of time now, but we haven't added a whole day of travelling to and from. Farah's a long way from where I am. Kathryn's actually quite near where we are today. Angela's even further up north. We wouldn't have been able to come together to have this conversation without the technology. And so we've been pushed into doing some different things, but that's not a bad thing. So let's look at the positive things that have come out of the year ahead, see what the year we've just had, see what the year ahead can bring. And the strategy, as I said, is all about preventing where we can, protecting and slowing down the progression where we can, and really transforming the treatment. So I don't think we can pick one. I don't think we need to pick one. We just need to make sure we're focused, and with the support of so many of you, and I'm just really grateful that you've come today and listened in, and hopefully we'll be able to share what you've heard today with other people. With the support of so many thousands of people across the UK, we will make a difference sooner rather than later. That's the intention. It's a complex area. You described it so brilliantly, all three of the presenters today, Kathryn, Farah and Angela, and I think many of our people listening will understand why it's complex and why it's really urgent and important. So thank you for joining us, and I hope that you'll stay in touch. You will know how to get in touch with us, I'm sure, and we really do want to hear from you, and if there's anything you can do, anything you want us to hear or take on board, just tell us. We're listening.
Thank you, Sandra. Just to sum up then, I'd like to just as well thank everybody for joining us today. If you're not involved and you want to get involved in the charity, go to our website, find out a way to get involved with us. I'd like to say thank you to Gemma and the team behind the scenes who did all the technical work and set this up. I wasn't pressing the buttons, thank goodness for that. A special thank you to Kathryn and to Farah for sharing your stories with us. It's been a pleasure hosting this event today, and hopefully we'll see you all again in the future for a similar event. Thank you very much. Goodbye.